Welcome, everyone, to another culture chat. We are so honored that you took the time out of your busy day, your busy schedule, to be here with us, to talk, to connect with each other, to share knowledge. If this is your first culture chat, these are really meant to be sessions that are focused on holistic professional development, but through a racialized lens. So we cover things from resume building to investing to mental health to just owning our own stories and everything in between to help us live vital and successful lives and careers. So, again, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chats. Um, I also wanted to let you know that twice a month we also have our check-ins. So these are meetup groups. So we meet virtually on Zoom, and it's a place for us to share, connect, support one another, uplift each other. And so these have been pivotal ways as a community that we help grow, that we help each other learn from mistakes, from opportunities that we can benefit from. And so I want to encourage you to check out our check ins. I will drop a link here and we can drop another one later on. So, 2 times a month, we have that. Our next check in is on the third Wednesday. I forget what date that is, but we'll confirm. And we have morning sessions and we have evening sessions. So, we try to provide something to meet your schedule. So, hope to see you there. We also have our monthly newsletter that we put out that lets you keep up to date with all of our events and things that we're putting on. So if you want to stay in touch with what we're doing here, upcoming events and webinars that we'll be hosting, please feel free to subscribe so you stay up on all of that. Now, in the past couple of weeks, I've had a few different people come up to me and talk to me saying something that they are the only on the team. They are the only in the boardroom, in their department. And they would talk about the weight that they would feel
Mm,
because of it. They would talk about the barriers that they would experience. And for me personally, I know that I felt that my differences were a weakness. So I often tried to minimize them. So I don't stand out as much because attention meant trouble in my mind and in previous experiences. And so I was conditioned to try and downplay, to hide, just to keep my
mm,
head down and to keep on working. But I know that that impacted me. And so I worked very diligently to try and reverse that. Um, but we know that walking down this path as the only, it can be a challenging path. And so I wanted to bring in somebody who can help us unpack all of these emotions, all of these feelings, all of these experience and help us to own our uniqueness in our own way. So I called in a fantastic speaker and media personnel, podcast host, and now the author of The Power of the Only, Own Your Voice, Thrive in Any Environment. She's passionate about empowering individuals to embrace their uniqueness. So everyone, please give it up for Angela Chee.
Hi, Nathan. So
Welcome.
great to be with you and your community. I remember we talked about this months ago, so I'm so glad it's happening.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us here. So let's just dive right into this.
Yeah.
Who is Angela? Tell us your story. How did you get here
Yeah.
talking about being the only, the power of the only? Maybe if you could just tell us kind of the story arc.
I know. Well, let's just start real short. So basically, I used to be a television news anchor and reporter in Los Angeles, right? So I worked my way through Hollywood. But way before that, I grew up as a young girl in a predominantly white neighborhood, even though I lived outside of Los Angeles. My Chinese immigrant parents. And I saw Connie Chung on TV.
Mm,
Connie Chung is a famous, iconic American broadcaster. She was the first woman to co anchor the CBS Evening News. But when I was 8 years old, I'd look up at the screen and my dad said, "Hey, you could be like Connie Chung." And I was like, "Me?" And back then there weren't a lot of representation on TV as there is now. And so it was a completely different, game in the early 80s. And so that planted that seed that I'm like,
mm,
"Really?" And fast forward, 19 years later, I ended up working at KCBS and I became a TV news anchor. Now, I skipped all the barriers in between. It doesn't just happen like that. But the story is that now then my dad could watch me on TV. And so my whole life I wanted to be like Connie Chung. And then I became Connie Chung, right? But that's, that's the whole lessons of how I was able to navigate those spaces. And it wasn't an easy journey. And then after I had children, I was an anchor in San Diego. After I had children, I recalibrated my life and I was like, you know what? I'm good because things were changing in the industry. I just had my first child. I had reached the top pinnacle. I was in the morning anchor here and things were shifting in the industry. And then when I parted, I was like, you know what? I'm going to keep hosting. And then I became a communication coach. And that process allowed me to, for the first time, go, whoa, I lost my identity, my external status, and I really had to build internal status as a coach, as a speaker, as a communication coach. And that whole journey, what I did to myself, being you amplified, turned into my work, right? About, even though I was on TV, I was, famous somewhat in my city, people knew me, but I hadn't really done the deep dive into who am I, what do I stand for, and how do I want to show up in the world? Because I was a journalist. I was talking about other people's stories, which then led me to my work of being a communication coach. And my work really is about helping people be you amplified. Who are you? What do you stand for? And how do you want to show up in the world? And so it comes across as like, speech coaching for executives or communication for groups. But ultimately, like you talked about, your show's holistic, is like, who are we on the inside to, and then mixing that with my journalism and my communication skills to create really a holistic leader, right? It's not just about how you sit and how you stand and how you answer interview questions. It's really about who you are as a person. And that led me to here. So now I'm a mother of two teenagers. I'm a communication coach and a speaker. And I've been on this personal journey myself. And so now I help other people step into their power. And my new work, it's not really new. I've been working on it for 6 years, but the power of the only hit me about 6 years ago. And I've been working really hard. And launch day was yesterday. So all the interviews, the whole podcast, the power of the only, and we can go deeper into that. But that's what happened as a transition about 6 years ago. It kind of hit me that being the only is not a weakness. Despite all the challenges, it is my greatest strength. And I spent 4 years interviewing onlys and trying to find the through line and backing it with research of how can we really show up as our greatest strength. I mean, I believe that. But what does it really mean? And so now that is the culmination. Yesterday was the culmination of all that work. So I'm honored to be here.
That's incredible. Thank you for that. It was a beautiful synopsis of all that. So, you use the word 6 years ago, it hit you. What exactly hit you? What did you uncover 6 years ago? What shifted in you?
Yeah. It's interesting because I've been a communication coach for a while and already peeled off all the layers of, to get to my core of my identity. And I was at this mastermind with a bunch of other coaches and everyone always asked my story. And I was like, well, when I was the only girl in my neighborhood. Oh, when I was the only woman keynote speaker on a stage of men. Oh, wait, when I was the only woman in Bakersfield being a reporter. Bakersfield is a small town outside of Los Angeles where I first started my news career before I got to LA. When I was I kept saying like the conversations like you just said, right? And then I told them stories and she goes, wow, that's powerful. I know there's power in being the only. And we looked at each other and I was like, there's power in being the only. And here's why. And I started going off on all these things. And she looked at me and she's like, you just made my hair stand up on my, and I'm like, yeah, because when I was little, even though it was hard, it was this. And then when I went to work, it was this. And then I could pitch the stories I wanted and this happened. And they're like, well, how did you handle it on stage when, it was all men and you were the only one? I'm like, yeah, it was great. Then I got to MC the show and then I got to share my perspective. And so it really started to hit me. And I was like, wow, why do I feel this way? What happened or what did I do? Because I didn't feel that way when I was that 8-year-old girl. I went through the traditional, my parents are Chinese immigrants, don't speak up, watch yourself. Oh, that's too dangerous. That's not safe. Because even though my dad said, oh, you could be like Connie Chung, when I told them I wanted to be like Connie Chung, they're like, oh, well, that's hard for a Chinese person. Oh, well, you sure? And I'm like, yeah, why not? You said I could be like Connie Chung when I was 8. They're like, well, but it's dangerous. And then you won't have children. And who knows, so they were kind of really protective. And so I got really mixed messages. So I didn't
Mm.
just come out this confident person. I got really mixed messages. My cultural background was, yes, do not rock the boat, do not say
Right.
anything. And so I felt that there was these processes that I had gone through. I'm like, how did I get to be this person? And then I wanted to find out, well, I feel this way. How do other people feel? Right? Is this actually true? And how do we get there? Is it the way we're raised? Is it the way I think? Is it my mindset? Is there something I can do? And so that's the journey I went on for 6 years. But yeah, it hit me in that moment that it was powerful, that being the only is not a weakness, it's your greatest strength. And then I went on a journey to discover why.
Yeah, that mixed messaging, right? Where it's like you can do anything. Are you sure you want to do
Yeah.
that? I think that that's such that speaks to so many of our experiences, even if it's the voices that we speak to ourselves, right? Like one day we're like, yeah, you can do this.
I
And
mean,
then
you're
the
like,
next
oh,
day you're like, what was I thinking? Who do I think I was? Or who do I think
well,
I
and it's,
am?
and I want to point out something interesting. So the reason everyone feels like an only, but certain onlys, there's more layers, right?
Mm,
So when we read leadership books, I get value out of them, right? But they're written through a certain lens. And so the reason I wanted to do this is because, of course, if you change your inner thoughts, of course, if you show up better, all those things are going to work. So I always say, I've coached executives, leaders, students, men, Asian women, white men, high level white men. And many of us, we struggle with the same things, right? Am I
mhm.
enough? Am I enough? They're all concerned about, am I showing up? Oh, do my slides look right? Do I feel this way? Are people listening to me? But as onlys, depending on how many layers of only you have, it's a little bit more nuanced. And that's the difference because we are all alike. We are, if you talk to anyone, even who that's not, with a certain cultural background, they feel like the only, I mean, we've all been that kid on the playground, right? Even if we're not a Chinese girl or whatever, everyone's had that emotion. But it's a little bit more nuanced. And I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the book to give credit to those that it's like, it's not just that easy, right? There are other layers depending on how many levels of onlyness you have.
That I mean, you said a lot in there. My mind just went into so many different directions. But what you said, everyone feels like an only, but then there's the only, right? And we talk about those layers of only. Can you like unpack that a little bit? Like what are these layers of only?
Yeah.
And what's the difference, I guess, between these different types of lonely? Like what when you talk about being the only, what is exactly are we talking about here?
Yeah. So I feel a strength with it, but I think it's because when I was younger, I did certain things and I got challenged and then I got either got rewarded for it or it worked out. And that's why a lot of times when we stay small, if you don't do those little mini bets on yourself, you don't actually get the validation. If you've only gotten, let's say, bullied, or if you've only gotten feedback that's negative, your brain's not going to want to do more, right? You're like, oh, so it's almost like you have to test the waters. You have to show up and own your power and your voice. I'm not telling you that it's going to be easy, but if you don't get those early reminders that it's going to work out. Right. But you also have to be careful in which environments that you do it in. So the layers of onlyness, and that's a journey that you have to go on for yourself because depending on how you were raised. And so in the book, which is interesting, what I did is like, I start off with, to realize that it's not all your fault, right? We have to recognize the external barriers first. I think what other things, thought leaders don't do is we don't recognize the external barriers. And I think that's what shifted in the last 5 to 7 years is that people started saying, no, there are barriers that we face. There is discrimination. Women are not paid the same. There is racial discrimination. It does exist. Right. Whereas before people just was like, no, we're all the same. Everything's good now. Right. And then I think that's what was happening with me when I started to dive into this topic is that things started coming up. It's like, no, it's not the same. There are nuances depending on who you talk to. Right. We've known that it's never been the same. But I think the world started to understand that there were levels without being overly talking about trauma or overly talking about it. So the layers are important to recognize. Lack of representation, how you grew up. So there's a whole chapter on the barriers. Like I didn't see myself represented. So sometimes you don't think you can. family cultural barriers, right? Our parents telling us you can, but be careful, don't do this, stay small. So then we're taught that way. Societal, stereotypes, things that are out there in the space. So those are the ways that we are only, right? Depending on if we're different. But there's also the internal ones. But the issue I have with is that it's important to know these barriers, because once you are aware of them, then you don't internalize them as a flaw. And I think
Mm,
that's what happens, is that if we don't honor that there are barriers, then we think that we're doing something wrong, right? And then that does start to wear on our internal barriers even more and creates more barriers. And then we're self generating it. So, yes, external barriers exist. And there's studies in my book that we talked about. I quoted several studies of college students, and it was a study between Black college students and white college students. And they went in with kind of this barrier, and they actually, like, they didn't belong, right? Like, you go into it, and it actually showed that when you feel like you don't belong, it actually creates internal barriers, and they actually did worse. And what they
mm,
did is they did an experiment of how they tried to show everyone that, like, no, all freshmen suffered from these same things. They kind of brought people together, probably what you're doing with culture chats. You bring people together, and they got to see that even the women, the other people felt exactly the same way. They're like, oh, you mean it's not just me? Like,
mm.
I'm okay. And that actually softened the effect of the internal barrier, right? And so that's what there's some studies that show that the belonging aspect of seeing that you're not the only one going through the same thing actually affected the internal barrier.
Mm. You talked about I guess the validation, right? If your onlyness is being punished, right? We start to see our onlyness as a weight versus if early on your uniqueness is praised and admire, we continue to lean into that power. So is that what you discovered? Is that for a lot of folks the weight that they experience from the only is just weight from past experiences related to their onlyness?
Well, it's all of those things, right? It's the stereotypes, and each individual is different. That's what's so, right? Depending on where you're raised, what you were told, the environments that you work in, that you put yourself in. So all those things affect us, right? The stereotypes, the lack of representation, if you worked in certain environments that weren't as friendly to you. And so what's interesting is I've experienced both, right? So when I was younger, I was bullied. Right. I was like, I got called the names and people ran off. I mean, I talk about, and this book is not a racial book, but you can't talk about being an Asian American woman without having a little bit of that experience. And so I'm not saying like, oh, well, I got all validated, so I'm powerful and all this stuff. No, like there was one time when I was younger, I was like, oh, yeah, roller skating, doing my thing, and got yelled racial slurs and thrown water at when my parents are walking by. And you would think like that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in California, And I was 8 years old, and for the first moment, I realized, wow, I'm different. Like, like it kind of, brought that into that reality. But how did I go from that girl to the teenager that was like, whatever, I'm the only one, I'm gonna do this. And I'm not a pageant girl, but I actually think that entering speech competitions when I was younger, and I did enter a pageant because I wanted to win scholarship money, and I won. And I was like, whoa, in my head, I was like, Chinese girls don't win. Maybe I'll make it to the top 10, win some money. Cool. It was based on grades and your essay grades and evening gown. It wasn't as glam as it was now. And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, well, I'm not going to win, but I'm going to enter because maybe I'll meet some cool people. But why did I say to myself, oh, I'm not going to win? Because I never saw evidence that I could win, right? The Asian girl didn't win. The blonde girl won, right? Or that was my experience in the 80s. And so
Yeah.
I think by putting myself out there, I was like, well, it's okay. I'm just going to do it anyway. And then I won. And I
Mm.
remember that photo. It was funny because girls cry like, oh my God, my mouth was like that's the shot. Like there's a little girl and my mouth is just open. Like, what? And that's what I mean. I mean, not everyone's going to enter a pageant, but that's what I mean by like, why did I think I couldn't? And then I did. And so then I was like, oh, well, maybe I can. And
Mm.
then I think those early experiences of being in speech competitions, learning how to speak and speak up for myself, getting validated. But I didn't win all the time. I mean, I worked in Hollywood. I got rejected all the time. I got rejected, faced, all kinds of things. But I think these mini experiences that we do, whatever aspect we do, they're little experiments. And I also have a whole section on protecting your energy because there are some environments that we don't want to put ourselves in, and that's okay.
So what is the power of being the only? What is it that is when you have those layers of onlyness?
Mhm.
Is what is this superpower that we all seem to possess, even
Yes.
though it may be dormant in us? What is
Yes.
it?
It's, seeing, understanding, and feeling what others don't. Right? It's being able to see ahead and to leverage that experience, all those experiences that we went through in order to achieve our goals, but also to have empathy to help others and to create the change we need. Because when I walk into a room, I can tell an only that gets it. And I think there's different parts of your journey. When if you would have talked to me when I was 10 years old, I wouldn't have said that there was power in being the only. I would have like, I there were layers to my onlyness. I didn't want Chinese food. I wanted McDonald's. I tried to fit in. I was like I didn't talk about my culture. I didn't really bring people home. We had shoes outside of our house. As soon as I came home, I would like throw them in the cabinet. We had a Buddha out front. Like everyone loves Buddha Asian things now, but back then I was like, that's weird, and I'd take it and I'd hide it in the backyard. And so there's layers to your onlyness. And at some point I realized well, I don't care, but it takes some sort of steps to get to that point. And now I embody all of my Asianness. I am very Chinese American. I always say to myself, I'm very Chinese and I'm very Southern Californian. And I own that, right? I grew up in Southern California. The way I think, when I first worked in New York as an intern, I remember I walked in and the receptionist was like from Long Island. She's like, "You're from California, aren't you?" And I'm like, what? So there's different layers of culture, right? There's like
Yeah.
Asian culture, and then there's California, East Coast, Canadian. There's nuances.
Yeah. So in the book you had mentioned you spoke to a number of people and you started identifying some trends of the only. Can you touch on what some of those trends that you uncovered during your research?
Yeah. Well, I have five principles, right? The five principles are basically owning your opportunity, right? Owning your opportunity. And actually, I can actually read exactly owning your opportunity, owning your voice, owning your power, owning your communication, and owning your future. And I believe that owning your future is how do you move from survival to thriving? Because it's great that I own my voice. It's great that I show up. It's great that I own my communication. But like you said, it's really hard. And if we don't move from a surviving mindset to a thriving mindset, we'll burn out because we can't
Mm.
take it all on. And so the healing part of the book is really important. So it's like almost like a leadership book meets a communication manual meets a self-help book because as onlys, it is hard, right? Sometimes it is a burden and not an opportunity, and we have to honor that. But how do we protect our energy and how do we move forward and thrive is the important part. But you talked about what people did. I want to read exactly what those own your opportunity means, right? Because it's nuanced. Owning your opportunity means you recognize your value and you don't wait for opportunities to come to you or think that you can't have something yet. You know nothing is stopping you from taking the opportunity in front of you. Now, owning your power actually means you already have everything you need inside to succeed. You don't need permission to take up space, and you don't need to change to fit in. You turn your external status into internal status and agency. And when you own your voice, you don't have to find your voice. You know that you already have it, and what you say matters, and the words that you use about yourself and others matter as well. And when you own your communication, you can communicate in a way that truly connects. So, in short, it means to be heard and felt so you can create the change you need and want. And again, owning your future is changing the mindset and the habits that you know that you have everything you need to thrive, and that how can you help now bring others into that process.
Mm. When you talked about moving from survival to thriving, the
Yeah.
words that come to my mind was like shifting from defense to offense, right? And I noticed that pattern for sure in myself, where I spent so much of my life on defense, right? How do I avoid trouble? How do I avoid this? Or how do I avoid getting called out? And everything was just about protecting myself. And
Mhm.
so I'm staying vigilant, head on a swivel, always watching for things that are going to disrupt me or interrupt me, and learning how to shift my life to being on offense, where now it's what is it that I want? And now I'm striving towards something as
Yeah.
opposed to putting all my energy into avoiding and protecting and defending. I have to do that. And what I'm hearing is when we switch to that offense, that's when we start unlocking some of that power of the only, because now I come with all of these unique
Mhm.
experiences, these unique perspectives, these unique skills, because I've navigated through the world in this way, that if I take that and I'm on the offense now, I'm able to bring such a unique skill set and perspective and value to situations that has, you know, that no one else can do. It's my unique thumbprint based on my experiences, but it requires me to be able to play offense and get out of defense.
Yeah, and it's a process. It's not easy, right? And there's like that's why I made it kind of a coaching journaling book. There's a process that I said of kind of how do you reframe your challenges from challenges to strengths, and also finding a new vision, right? And it doesn't just end like one time you did it. Like I've already recalibrated myself, especially when I was younger, and then I did it again when I became a new
Yeah.
mom. I lost all my external status. Like I stepped out of the TV world and into the coaching online world, and I was like, wait a second. Who am I? What is this? I had to start over and
Yeah.
recalibrate. And now in midlife, like I think every 4 to 5 years, you almost have to reinvent yourself a little bit and take the wisdom that you have, honor it, and then go, where else am I stuck? But you talked about something interesting about yes, because if we go too far, we can be hyper vigilant. And there's reasons to be hyper. However you were raised, you're like, I'm aware, I'm watching, like, what's this? What's this? But isn't that an amazing skill? Isn't that why you started Culture Check?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It because you're like, I see what others don't see. I know that there's a need for this. I understand when I'm in that room what that person's feeling, and I'm going to make them feel better. And I'm going to lead the way and create a community where we all can join together and we all get it. And then we can create the change together.
Mm.
And I believe that you are the power of the only. That is what you did. But you may not have felt that way. Maybe I don't know where your journey led you like years ago. It's a
Yeah.
process, but now you what you've created is the power of the only,
Mm.
right?
I didn't even know it. I
But
love it.
I'm asking you, does it feel that way?
No,
I mean,
no, no,
yeah.
I'm joking. But yeah, no, absolutely. Like this is the work that we're doing now is the amalgamation of all of those experiences, that it's like I'm seeing now connections between all of these different phases in my life and things that I've gone through. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, they were all relevant for me in this exact moment, in this exact period. And it's every now and then it just continues to blow my mind how all of these things I thought had no connection to each other in my life, right? And now all being brought together for this moment. And so it seems as though, we are being prepared for our purpose at all times, right? But so often we cower away from that, right? Or it's just like we don't step up. We allow all of the weight, the self-doubt to prevent
And
us
that's
from stepping
okay.
into that purpose.
Right? And that's okay. It's human, it's natural. And I want people that are listening to understand it doesn't have to be grand and huge. You don't have to go start a whole culture check, like, build a whole thing. It's in those micro moments of showing up and
Mm,
going, I honor myself, I honor my past, I honor my bullying. That's part of it. Hopefully we're not in a situation where it's really intense and we need to get out of it. But as when we're younger, we can't process all that stuff. But that makes you the things that I went through allow me to see empathetically. I can tell, like, and that's the number one key to communication. What's the number one key to communication? Your keynote speaker, know your audience. I
mm,
feel like I can connect with anyone and I can make anything happen. And that was cultivated through years of not fitting in, cultivated through years of being a translator for my parents, cultivated when I was younger. Probably didn't like that. I didn't like being a translator for my parents. My parents speak English, but there was still nuances, like I almost had to be the, the bridge. Now I can be a bridge builder. I understand where people are coming from right away.
Mm,
But and I have a whole chapter on bridge building, but we have to be careful because it can be exhausting, right? And so that's what, when anything that you're doing is a skill, it's like, through challenges or hardships, we gain these amazing strengths. Now it's up to us to have agency to choose when we use these strengths or when we don't. Because if we go too far, it can become hypervigilance, which is actually a stress response, right? If I'm paying attention to what everyone's doing and what's this, is everyone happy? Is this going on? If I'm protecting myself, is it safe? We're expending energy in a way that moves us here. And so the goal is to honor our strengths, I'm empathetic. I understand where people are coming from. I know how to connect. I know how to get my point across. I know how to move the room. And then when it gets to a point where it's too much, you know how to move into thriving. And that's the part that's important, which is I talk about protecting your energy and discernment,
mm.
because it can be exhausting and it's not always your responsibility.
What are your thoughts on, when you are the only and now you are the Connie Chung for somebody else, right? And
Yeah.
you feel the weight of representing a whole group, right? You are the voice, you are
Yeah.
the image. And there can be a lot of weight with that cause people to shy away or feeling that anxiousness that if I mess up, I'm ruining it for everyone else coming after me and that weight. Can you walk us through your thoughts on that and just navigating that emotional burden of being the
Yeah.
only?
I personally see it as an honor, but not everyone feels that way. I actually talk about it. I actually talked to several people about it, about how it can be an opportunity versus a burden. And I did talk and know a lot of people see it as a burden. And it also depends on what industry you work in and what your environment is. Like what are you taking on as the burden? Now, for me as a thought leader, I see it as an honor, right? It might have been different when I was navigating if you're in certain tight spaces where it really is like if you don't do well, then it doesn't quite work out. But I think overall, I I see it as an honor. Like even with being a keynote speaker and all that, I feel like I speak to Asian audiences all the time, but I go on main stages all the time too. And I feel like the biggest way that I can contribute to my to the people that are like me is to show up on those main stages and not to stay in the small rooms, because that's the whole point. Doesn't mean I don't want to serve those rooms. I still serve those rooms, but I'm saying it's showing you that you don't have to stay in these things. So I see it as an honor, and I do go into it. Seven people that saw it as a burden, and I think it's important to recognize that because not every room is the same. But I personally see it as an honor because when you're in the room, you change the room just by being there, whether you like it or not, right? You change the room by being in the room. When I was a news anchor, I worked in small markets, and I remember in Bakersfield, it was a predominantly white neighborhood, farm town outside of Los Angeles, very almost like not like a Los Angeles at all. And I remember I would bring certain stories. Like I did the Chinese history of Bakersfield. There were these underground tunnels for in the old railroad days. And I found there was this one museum that was like the Chinese museum. I'm like, there's not even any Chinese people here. What is this Chinese museum? And I went inside, and it was part of Kern County. They had talked about in the olden days, there was like underground rail, all these things. And I was like, we need to know about this. So I was able to go in there, find out about the story, and put it on the news. And if I wasn't Chinese, the story mattered to everyone. There was a street called Ming Avenue. And I'm like, why is there a Ming Avenue in this small farming town? And it's because there was a Chinese history. And as a Chinese person, I felt it was an honor to dig through that story and to bring it to light, even though everyone around, probably was like, knew Ming Avenue, knew the area, but didn't know the history of it. And so me as an Asian person, I was able to bring that perspective and share it on a bigger level. And my news organization's like, oh, great. Okay, let's do it. And so I'm proud of that small piece in that small market. And now I believe there are universities like archiving. This is like 20 years later. I mean, this was years ago. They actually have a Chinese archive where they're digging through the documents and trying to put it online and have it. But I'm saying it's those little things that you do because you have a perspective that allow change to happen. And it doesn't always have to be big.
Hey, that's beautiful.
But it's
Do
hard,
you?
it just depends. It's nuance. And
Yeah.
it's knowing that you have agency to choose. Because there's some environments where I'm there just to do, I'm not there to speak for all Chinese people. There's a time where I'm like, no, I understand this. Let me help out. And there's other times where who I am doesn't matter. It's because I'm a good speaker, not because I'm an Asian or a woman speaker, right? Sometimes if I know things, it plays a part, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. Agency and discernment, right? Those are the
Yes,
two things that you emphasizing that
yes.
no matter what, like I'm still an individual. I'm choosing what works for me and what doesn't. And then I have that discernment and my situation and the context is now appropriate to push forward, or maybe I just want to pull back a little bit or what have you. So just not always doing the same thing no matter the situation or the context.
Yes, and not creating, and that's really hard, but that's the thing. I think when when you honor your past and you know who you are and you create a new vision, then you can be clear to have that filter of discernment to get clear because I can't write to everyone's experience and I'm not going to not honor everyone's experience. So we also have to make sure what is external, what is internal, and what has the external caused our internal not to be accurate, right? Like sometimes it is external. You're like, nope, not going there. This is not right. I'm no, it's not working. No matter what I do, it's not going to make a difference. But sometimes the anticipation of the external causes internal barriers that don't need to be there, right?
Mhm.
And that's the part we can control. So it's like, what do I take on and what do I not? And that's important to figure out. But when you own who you are and you own your power and you own your voice and you own your communication and you create a new vision, then you're more clear on how to have that discernment.
Okay. Do you
I know it's a
feel,
lot, right? It's a whole journey.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
already midlife. I mean, it takes a while to get to these layers, and I've spent a lot of time. Uh, it's interesting. I think I automatically did it when I was younger and through my career, and then as a speaker and a thought leader, now I'm starting to unpack why, how do other people do it, and so that's why it was important.
Mm. Did you come across or do you have any thoughts on when the power of the only goes wrong? That maybe like when you start speaking up, when you start walking in your purpose, that it does put a target on your back. It does make you prone to critiques, criticisms, or attack, especially like in the workplace. People might not like that. And they might try before when you were quiet and in your corner, no
Yeah,
one bothered you. But now you want to come with all your power
yeah.
and you're disrupting my environment or you're challenging my status or my sense of certainty or anything of that nature, that now you start experiencing this pushback. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And I waited till the end of the book, but there's a lot of people where I talk about when it's time to walk away and when it's time to build your own table, right? Because there are going to be times. So I talk about Reese Witherspoon in the book. I talk about Ava DuVernay in the book. Most of the people in my book are my clients, so they're not all famous people. But Ava DuVernay, it was interesting. They kept telling her, this is part of owning your opportunities. They kept telling her that she made the movie Origin based on the book Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. Are you familiar with that
Yeah,
book? Yeah.
yeah.
And they said, you can't go to the Venice Film Festival. They don't like those kind of films. She's like, every year they told her not to apply, not to apply, not to apply. And she's like, okay. And then she ended up applying, getting in last year and got a standing ovation at the Venice Film Festival. Now that's the celebrity part. In the day-to-day part, there are times where you're going to have to decide for yourself what works and what doesn't. And the negative, and you were asking me about the negative parts, right? About like what happens when you get, there's sometimes it comes a point where you realize it is all the environment and not internal, right? And then you can't control sometimes those situations. So, and it's also important not to make sometimes you can't walk away. People don't just like, oh, a lot of people just say, burn all the boats and just walk away. Well, sometimes I remember, so this is interesting. When I worked in small markets, I was going to run out of money. I couldn't walk away, right? Like some people don't have the privilege to walk away. It's like, I got to do what I got to do. And so those are the times where we have to understand, what is my goal? When your vision is clear, my goal is to support my family and live a nice life. I don't need to change the world today.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Not
Wow.
everything is not everything is mine to take on. Right.
Mm,
But you have to be clear on your vision. What is your vision? Is your vision, not everyone's job is their whole passion and mission and life. It's just like, this is what I'm doing, and I get my passion and my mission over
yeah.
here. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that distinction of, until I am clear on my vision on what I want for my life, everyone else is going to try and dictate. With intentionally or unintentionally, they'll try to they'll occupy that space. And so I'll find myself being pulled in all sorts of directions, but until I'm clear on this is who I am, this is what I'm about, this is where I'm going, then you don't know what to say no to or what to say yes to, right? And you're always just like, well, this seems like a good decision, but it's only a good decision if it makes sense within the context of what you have defined for yourself.
Yes, and we know we're keynote speakers. We're mission driven. We've come to a place in our life where I've learned this, and I want to share this, and I'm moved by taking on those challenges.
Mm.
Not everyone is wired that way to take that rejection, to feel like they want to put themselves out there all the time. It doesn't have to be your responsibility. You can just lead a nice, happy life. You know what I mean? Like, you don't, sometimes I go, I wish I didn't have all these ideas. Actually, I don't not wish, but it is hard, right? It's
Yeah.
hard to be the one that is the trailblazer. It's hard to be that change maker. And I wrote this book for, yes, trailblazers and change makers, but if you don't want to be, you don't have to be. It could just be like, I'm going to speak up today because I want, this person to hear me better.
Yeah.
And that's as simple as that,
Yeah. All right. I know we're coming up, so I just want to put it out there. If you have questions for Angela, you want to put it in the Q&A function or put it in the chat, and we can get those questions. So start sending them in, and I'll just ask a couple more questions as stuff
Great.
starts coming in. So, okay, you've sold me on this power of the only thing.
Yes.
What's my first step? Where do I go from here? What do I start doing? Okay, sorry. Second step after buying the book, that's first step. And then the second step, what's the second step that I need to take to really learn how to embody and embrace this power?
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting, that's why I made it a coaching and a reflections. There's exercises and coaching, that go after each section. So it's not just like, I did it, you can do it too. It's like, okay, great. I did it. This person did it. Here's what they struggled with. Here's how it worked. Now let's reflect upon how that applies to your life. So that's what
Mm,
it is. I would say one of the exercises in there we talk about is, I guess just shifting our mindset with our strength being a challenge, being a strength. Like we talked about, I grown up, I was, bullied a little bit, didn't fit in. It can be hypervigilance or it could be empathy, right? I have a person in there that grew up really poor, right? Scarcity mindset, food vouchers for lunch, always kind of like not enough, not enough. Now you understand where people are coming from. You value, you have like, I know how to get a good deal. Like you understand, long as it doesn't go into the opposite side. So me being a translator for my parents all the time, dealing with that, I am a really good bridge builder. At time, it was a huge burden, right? So first it's taking, how do you switch from your challenges, taking a look at the challenges in your life, and are you seeing them as all negative? Or are
mm,
you able to reframe them in a way that serves you? I would say that's the first step. And then the other steps, there's different processes, but I have a lot of science-backed things in there, like celebrating your wins. That's the number one way to step into your power. And we talked about those little mini micro moments of how do we validate ourselves if we're not getting the external validation, right? Okay, celebrating our wins is so powerful. I'll share the story. I just had my launch party. If you see some stuff online, I'm in a gold dress, and my friends were here. I almost didn't have the party. I didn't have the party because when we were younger, I didn't really celebrate a lot. My parents were Chinese immigrants. It was like, yeah, great, cool. Oh, yay, you got that. Like even when I won the pageant, they're like, oh, what do we have to do now? I'm like, what do you mean? What do I have to do now? And everyone else's parents are like, yeah, yeah, the stands. And my parents are like, do we have to pay something for the next fee? And I'm like, oh my God, and so I didn't celebrate because it was like good enough,
mm,
right? And so those are the things that come up for me all the time. And I consciously, this is the surviving thing, I consciously, like when I buy flowers, I hear my mom's voice, so wasteful, they're going to die.
mm.
I'm like, and I hear it in my head, and I'm like, oh, I don't need those flowers. Oh, I don't need the party. Oh, I don't need to buy that expensive salad, even though I've moved out of the survival mode, but I still have it. And so no, I'm gonna consciously buy flowers, right? And I'm gonna consciously have it, but I have to actually, for some people, they don't even think about it. Right. They just automatically me, 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 me. But because I came from a scarcity mindset, I have to actually think about it, flip it, and then do it anyway, you know.
Yeah.
And so I would say we would start with that is honoring who you are, honoring your past, reframing your challenges, celebrating your wins, and honoring all those micro moments if you don't get external validation for internal validation. And there's also science behind celebration. The science behind celebration is that it actually makes you more productive. It activates things in your system that allow you to do more. There's this cycle of celebration that I talk about. And also using tools like nostalgia and things to kind of help heal your system and reminding yourself of certain things like nostalgia. I love listening to 80s music and watching these 80s clips online. And I was like, why? Why does that make me happy? And there's actually science behind nostalgia that it actually helps activate certain things in your system and helps you be more productive. And so there's all these tools I have in the book to how to actually activate these things in yourself to create this energy of the power.
Hey, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I something you had said earlier, when you talked about everyone wants to be an only or everyone sees themselves as an only, that's really stuck with me because it's something I've been reflecting on where, nowadays I feel like I don't know if it's with influencer culture, but being unique feels like it's much more valued now than it was when I was growing up,
Oh,
right? It was
yes.
like before it was like
Totally.
conformity, like be the same, dress
Yes.
like we all wear the same shoes, and now everyone's just like, no, my shoes are limited. No one else in the world has them, right? Like to me, I was like, that was that was not a
Yeah.
good thing back in the day if you were the only one who had something, right? And so just that shift where now you see a lot of people where it's like, okay, what makes me unique, right? I want to add all of these different aspects to me to shape that identity. Um, I don't know, maybe I don't know what my question is exactly, but just as now as I think as become being an only has become in vogue, right? And now it's like being unique is much more celebrated. What are your thoughts on like the future of onlys? What does that look like?
Yeah, we're at a really interesting time. I'm here in the States. So it went from like when I was younger, like hide all parts of myself, right? Hide my shoes, hide my food. There was no Chinese food around. But what's really interesting, my dad, I talk about my dad and how we passed out Chinese food to the neighborhood, right?
Mm,
I call it as, is one seed in their cultural awareness. That is actually, we embrace the power of the only, even back then, even though I felt different, we were like, oh, try this. And people are like, oh, this is good. It's like, you do what you can. But then I moved into things like, yeah, total conformity. I, dress like everyone else, be like everyone else, hide out. And then now when I was younger, there was no representation on TV. Now there is actually a lot of, you've made strides in the Hollywood area and different areas. And we're still not all the way there. Uh, but it's different. But now there was, and then even in the last few years, it's been like, yes, women power, do this, do that. And now we're kind of going a little bit not, we're going kind of in another direction, which
yeah.
was really, and I have to honor that because it's really challenging, right? I wrote this book starting 6 years ago. It's been through like 5 stages. The world has kind of, it keeps shifting.
Yeah.
I keep shifting. And that's why I say thrive in any environment. Because when you are whole, you honor your past, you have internal validation, the world is going to keep shifting. So the skills that I used when I was younger are the same skills that I use now, obviously more refined, but the world has changed probably several times in that process, right? And now it's shifting in a way, but I'm still super hopeful because we need to see, oh gosh, and I have a whole a section on media literacy as well, information, being careful of the information that you consume. So I think our world is a better place than we think it is because on a daily basis, I work with companies, I work with people who are moving forward, who are open-minded, who are doing great, great things. And so those are the people that we need to associate with. Those are the people that we need to connect with, and that we need to be our power of the only. So we show up fully to those situations and cultivate the communities in the world that we want to see while still honoring that the world is messy and the world
Mm,
is chaotic. But the whole point of my book is to own your voice and thrive in any environment, because the environment will continue to shift depending on the day, depending on what news channel you're watching. You're just like, if you take all that on, it will drag you down. And it's important to stay aware. I'm not saying hide. I'm saying stay aware, but we have to be careful of our energy. What do I choose to take on, and what is the reality of the world that I choose to see? And I see the good. Even though there is a lot of chaos and there is a lot of bad, I'm choosing to surround myself and work in environments and support the people that are doing the good, and highlighting those stories and highlighting that, well, without being naive, right? I'm not hiding from it. And I think when you understand what's happening, it gives you the tools to, like, okay, that is happening. I need to stay aware, but I'm going to cultivate the good. And so I'm very hopeful for the onlys. And I hope that anyone that's feeling challenged right now, that they start taking a deeper look inside and focusing on themselves. And so that they can bring that out and actually create the change. And the ones that are further along in their journey that feel ready, like you do, are the ones that are going to create the change for the other people in the future.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
What a beautiful way to end it. That was
I'm
fantastic.
not letting them stop me, anybody.
That was
And,
beautiful.
sometimes it's hard, and it's
Yeah.
okay, and then you have to honor yourself.
Well, thank you, Angela. That was incredible. I know we have some people asking about the books. So we know indigo.ca, we have your book, and then also your website, right? They could buy.
Yeah, if you could go to if there's a problem, I know there's been a distribute problem, but yes, Indigo, the Canada retailer. If you're in the US, you can go to poweroftheonly.com. I have a lot of links, but a few places are sold out already. But if there's also a direct buy, and then that'll ship straight from my publisher. If you want to go to the site, there's like 4 buttons. There's a direct buy button, and that'll get shipped out. Canada might take a little longer, but it will, better than some of the retailers that are sold out.
Yes, excellent. Well, this has been incredible. I know we've seen a lot of comments. People are loving all of the things. There was a lot of nuggets in there. I can't thank you enough. I appreciate so much, and taking all the things that you've learned in your journey, all of those experiences, packaging it up for us is such a beautiful gift. And Joe, so I'm just grateful for your time. I'm grateful for the efforts that you've put into this book, and grateful for the work that you continue to do and the paths you continue to pave for those following behind. So Angela, I truly want to thank you. This was such a great conversation. It's left me with a lot to chew on and think about. So I'm grateful for it.
Oh, I appreciate you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing and the community that you're building. And I think that I just want, the core reason why I wrote this book is that, my parents are Chinese immigrants, and they don't always see their brilliance.
Mm.
And I have a hard time when I see someone, they're like, I can't, I don't want, this isn't working. And I just want people to see the brilliance inside them. However you choose to use that is fine, but I don't like people stopping themselves. So they're just to know that they are enough, and that the power is already within them. And I hope that they actually feel that.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
The amount of quotes and one-liners from this, I'm grateful for it. No, that is beautiful. That is such an amazing way to end. Um, I see Sasha shared in the chat here. We have, as we mentioned, we have our check-ins coming on March 19th. We have one at 8 a.m. Eastern. We have a check-in on March 26th at 6 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to come through and talk and chat, and these are great ways of having community and accountability around some of the things we've talked about, around celebration, around resetting some of our previous thinking. We also shared a link to our mental health for success program. So we've paired with a mental health practitioners who are able to provide members of our community with 4 free sessions of therapy with racialized therapists. So unpacking a lot of the things that we have from our past, from those past experiences that are barriers to help us to holding on to our power, from seeing and recognizing our power. So I want to encourage all of you to go and connect with one of those therapists. And after those 4 sessions, if you enjoy them, it's half price. So instead of $130 per session, it's only $60 per session. So we want to try and make sure that these mental health supports are more accessible to people in this community. And so, we're here to help you on this journey to uncover your greatness, to uncover a lot those hidden gems that are inside each and every one of us. That's why we exist. So please take advantage of all of these resources that we're providing. And again, we're just grateful for all of you for taking the time out to be with us. And Angela, once again, thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experiences, and just being your vulnerability and just sharing that it has an impact, right? And as you said, you being in the room changes the room, and you have definitely changed this room by being here. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. I will see you all next month, and we're looking forward to it. We'll have the recording ready. So if you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll get information about the recordings for this past session. And we hope to see you at one of our future events. Hope you all have a great day, and we'll talk soon.